Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your networking coffee. And welcome to session 2 on the need for systemic change, the perfect segue after session 1 this morning. Where do we go from here? Expertly moderated by the other half of this dynamic duo. So for those of you tuning in online for the first time, my name is Rose O'Donovan and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brussels-based publication AgriFacts. And I will be moderating this session until 12:30. So I would now ask you to take your seats and to settle down because we've got a lot to get through between now and 12:30. So as before, during session 1, we are going to make this as interactive as possible, and there will be a question in a moment for you to ask questions. And for those of you joining online, you can get those questions into us and they will be transferred to me in the monitor just in front. So as I said, for the next 60 minutes or so, we are going to be discussing the need for systemic change. Just to go through the running order, if I may, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have our panelists, and they will describe and present their opening remarks in about 5 minutes. Each one has been allocated the same amount of time, so it's all very fair. And then from around 12:10 or so, I will open the floor for questions from the audience, and there are microphones available. And just before I hand over the floor to our second inspirational speaker of the day, and Anna Rush really set the bar quite high during her discussion this morning, her inspirational talk, Samo Login, who is the founder and CEO of the Login Foundation, Login 5 Foundation, will deliver the second inspirational talk of the day. But just before Samo takes the stage, ladies and gentlemen, we do have the pleasure of having Professor Peter Strohschneider amongst us, who is, of course, the chairman of the Strategic Dialogue on the Future of Agriculture, which obviously Commission President announced initially on September 13th during her State of the Union speech last year. So without further ado, I would like to first of all introduce our distinguished panelists right on the podium. So first up, I would like to welcome Mr. Patrick Child, who is Deputy Director General in the Commission's DG Environment, with particular responsibility for the EU's zero pollution strategy, chemicals legislation, urban agenda, research and innovation for the environment and communication. A warm welcome to you, Patrick. Next up, we have Jörg Andreas Krüger, who is President of NABU, the Nature and Biodiversity Conservation Union, which is Germany's oldest and largest environmental association. Welcome to you, Jörg Andreas. Next up, we have Nana Louise Linda, who is Vice President in charge of European Government Affairs at Microsoft. A competition lawyer by training, Nana Louise brings almost 2 decades of experience at Microsoft, which is one of the forum's partners. And right at the end there, we have Sébastien Abis, who is Managing Director of Club de Meter in France since 2017. Club de Meter, for those of you not in the know, is an ecosystem which brings together 87 companies and professional structures and is focused on forward-looking thinking, global issues and cross-sector dynamics linked to agriculture, food and sustainable development. And finally, joining us online, I would like to introduce Vanessa Stifler-Klaus, who is Vice President in charge of International Policy and Strategy at John Deere, a leading producer of agricultural, forestry and construction machinery, which is, of course, one of the forum's partners. A warm welcome to you, Vanessa Stifler-Klaus, and we'll be hearing from you momentarily. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give my distinguished panelists a very warm round of applause. So Patrick, you just told me that you're after coming from the European Parliament. The demonstrations are kicking off right now in the European quarters, as you said. The Agri-Fish Council is taking place at Schuman. We've just emerged from a winter of discontent, really, as was discussed by Stephen and his panelists in the first session. So I'm interested to hear from your perspective, coming from DG Environment. So when you're ready, the floor is yours. Go right ahead.
Well, thanks very much, Rose, and very happy to be here. As you say, rather a sort of topical moment when we're all giving a lot of attention to the vital role that the agri-food sector has in our economy and society. And I must start by saying personally, I'm very proud that we have such a strong sector which is responding so powerfully and necessarily to the the needs of our population in food security, in also providing healthy and nutritious food for our people. And also with my sister being a farmer, married to a farmer in an underprivileged rural community, I think I have a degree of connection with the sort of challenges that we're facing. And the challenges are huge, and we recognize that. I mean, we've had, of course, a great show of resilience by the agricultural community over the last few years in navigating first the challenges of COVID, the spillover effects of the Russian invasion in the Ukraine, the resulting imbalances in trade and the sort of competitive pressures that the sector have been facing, and inflation, high energy prices. So, we recognize a difficult moment for agriculture. And especially when you put those sort of, let's hope, short-term challenges on top of the structural issues that we're having to face with climate change, with an increasing evidence that extreme weather patterns, disruptions in traditional patterns of agricultural production, as well as the challenges of biodiversity loss and changing patterns of production globally. And I think, what we in DG Environment take away from this is that the challenges of meeting climate change and biodiversity very much go together, that you can't do one without the other, that ensuring good protection, preservation of nature is a vital part of providing the sort of carbon sinks and environment for climate change. And if we don't solve the issues of climate change, then the consequences for our agricultural sector and for nature are really dramatic. And so I think it's very timely that we're having this discussion. And I think there is a growing recognition that also very much in the interests of the farming communities, that we do need to address these challenges head on and think about what might need to change. So whether that's a question of moving away from extensive use of chemical fertilizers or pesticides, investing in new nature-based or organic farming techniques, working together to preserve our soils, avoiding erosion and making sure that we have the most production potential from our agricultural system, as well as, and I think this is something which is really going to be a focus also in the mandate of the next Commission, thinking about how we manage water and the whole question of water resilience. And so I guess that my main message today is that we're not going to address these challenges unless we do it working together. And that's why I think it is so encouraging that our President van der Leyen has set out on this journey of the strategic dialogue for the future of agriculture. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the Professor's remarks after this session. And really, we think that this pattern of engagement with, of course, with the farming communities, with the industry, but also with civil society and other stakeholders is the way we need to go if we're going to address some of the tensions that we see. So tensions in terms of the challenge of short-term production and medium to longer-term sustainability, competition for land use, particularly as we see pressure on biomass and the forestry sector, and also increasingly as we look forward to the next multi-annual financial framework, pressure on budgets, which I think is only going to become more difficult. So I think that for all of those reasons, it is very, very important that we're able to find new ways of working together. And just before I finish, and I've got 48 seconds left, just a few moments on some of our ongoing legislative proposals. I mean, firstly, we were deeply disappointed, of course, that yesterday the Environment Council was not able to adopt the nature restoration law. We think the nature restoration law really does provide a framework to strike the right balance between the necessary continued production of our agricultural sector to meet our needs, but with also a growing attention to the medium to long-term sustainability challenges which we're all aware of. We're also making, I think, progress on two other pieces of legislation as part of our biodiversity strategy on the soil monitoring and forest monitoring, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to come to those later in the discussion.
Thank you, Patrick. And you brought it right up to speed there with yesterday's Environment Council, as you say, the nature restoration law, and how we saw last week that was frozen effectively by EU ambassadors. And later on, I'll pick you up on the point on addressing tensions. And I'm curious to know, as an outsider, as a journalist, what even those tensions are like in-house in the European Commission, even between DG Environment and DG Agri. So maybe that's pause for thought for a moment later. But listen, for now, a perfect segue to yourself then, Jörg Andreas. Patrick raised the nature restoration law, frustration there on the part of DG Environment, obviously frustration with the likes of NABU. So please, when you're ready, take it away.
Thank you very much for this opening question, Rose. For sure, we are really deeply frustrated, and we still hope that we will find a way to get a majority for the nature restoration law. It is crucial, and it brings me to one important point which which I have in my head for the whole morning. We have heard now so many things about the crisis, about the complexity, about the time pressure, about the need for coherent policy packages. But the question is, how can we come to that? How can we develop that? And what we see at the moment is that the political system is struggling with that. Since we have the protests, we have some unclarities, we have all these complexity from the geopolitical level and so on. But I mean, when we not follow the pathway which we developed with the Green Deal or with other documents like the Montreal-Kunming Biodiversity Agreement 2 years ago in December, then we can't build up the trust which is needed for the transformation. I'm really happy that we have heard in the morning nobody who's questioning that this transformation of the agro and food sector is a task for the society as a whole. It is not just changing a little bit on the farms. It's not just changing a little bit in the food sector and the food industry. It is a complex system, and it has changed a little bit its purpose. For us in NABU, we see that in the past, for centuries, farmers has to provide food in a good quality and in a good amount. What we see now is that farmers has to become more land managers, which are the persons who really know and knew how to have a soil in healthy conditions, how to have water there in the landscape, how to have biodiversity there in the landscape. And for these are cultural changes as well. And what I always miss in the discussion is this cultural dimension. I'm coming from a farming background. My family has worked on organic soils, and it was a development of 150 years to make that land arable. And now we are coming back and say, surprise, surprise, we wanted to change that back, and please re-wet that for the CO2 emissions. And we are coming with no opportunities and options. We say, yes, we will give you some funds for 5 years, maybe for 7 years, but that is a cultural change and the change of the business model for generations. And we have to take that more and more into account, since otherwise we will not get the trust back again in the farmers, among the farmers. And without the trust, there is no good way in all this transformational change. I mentioned that I see there is a systematic approach for the whole society. And for sure, how is the way? For sure, there's a role for everybody of us to play. And normally the way is really that we have a political system which sets the frame, and then we have the market who can solve with innovation a lot of solutions and develop a lot of good ideas and programs. And I'm coming back now to the current situation. When we are changing the political frame every 5 minutes or every year, then we will not be on a pathway for a transformation, and we will not come back to the farmers. And the open question for me here in the surrounding is really, how can we have a conversation with the farmers in a productive way? I really like the idea of the Commission here at the Brussels level, since I had the luck to be part of the Commission in Germany for 2 years, and we built up a network between environmentalists, farming organization, food industry. And I mean, it's now 2 years ago that we published the report, and we are not happy that the politicians took it all and make it into practice, but we are still in good contact, and we are working together. We have our battles and so on, but we work together in this cooperation, and we will find solutions for the conditionalities in the CAP, and we will find solutions for nature restoration, and where and how to make it and how to finance it. But we have to build up the trust again, to bring the people on a table, and then bring the trust back to the regions with some regional exchange formats, cooperative models. That is, I think, the task for the hour. We lost with the protests of the last months. I think we lost 2 or 3 years in the transformation. That is a really difficulty, but I mean, we have now really to invest in these trust-building, communication, cooperation, and setting the legal flame. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jörg Andreas. And I suppose it's really about timing here, isn't it? I mean, you're talking about a very politicized debate now. And most recently, we saw, of course, the rolling back of provisions, right, related to conditionality, related to the GAC 8, etc. You must regret all of that. You must regret how politicized the debate has become.
It is politicized and it's a little bit becoming more populistic, and that's the difficulty. If you have a politicized discussion where you have a good discussion about facts, then it's something different. What we have now is that we have meanings and that we have people who don't want a solution. They just want to see something burn. And that is the problem. And for all of us, it's a task to bring people back away from the populism to a good solution.
Yeah, okay, good point there. And that's something we'll be discussing after lunch with an MEP from the Czech Republic, Marta Lavacek, and we will be discussing that in more detail. I suppose that shift to the right that's possibly imminent in the European elections. So thank you for that, Jörg Andreas. Next up, Nana Louise. You're coming from the Microsoft perspective, so very different from these two gentlemen. So please, when you're ready, take it away.
Yes, very different, but I hear the need for a systematic approach. I hear the need for working together, and I think my main message today will be that we hope we can be part of the solution. I'm not an expert in agriculture, but I do see the frustration with the demonstrations, and I do understand, you know, there's a pressure on the economy, higher prices, environmental requirements, and we need this community also to produce more food, because by 2050, we will need 50% more food to feed the growing population of the world. We think that the solution can be to cut production costs and make farming more efficient with the use of data and AI, and hopefully give via AI better insights into the data points of the production, and by that giving the farmer more information and better information to make the right choices. So it's really our hope, and we can see very nice examples already, that more data, more insights into when to water, when to use more fertilizer and so on, can give them a tool for making better decisions. At the same time, that will help environment as well. But of course, we also need legislative framework that will help in that process. So we'll need, you know, legislation that supports the green and digital transformation, that promote the use of AI and make sure that people are trained and informed about what's possible, and equal access to digital tools as well. So these are some of the elements that needs to be looked into from a regulatory point of view as well.
You speak there about equal access. What's Microsoft's role when it comes to that sort of accessibility issue for farmers, right? I mean, at the top of the show, we heard via video link from the Commission boss, Ursula von der Leyen, saying basically that innovation investment in these new technologies is all very well, but that will require cost. And as Patrick just said, the budget, the European budget, we're going to see in the next financial framework serious, I would imagine, cuts to the CAP budget, considering the obligation regarding defence, Ukraine enlargement, etc., etc. So what's Microsoft's role in all of this in addressing the accessibility issue?
So it's something that we've been thinking about actually for 8 years, since we started to really double down on AI. We came out with our AI principles, which, for example, talks about inclusivity, transparency, non-biased, security, and respecting privacy. So we're trying to build the accessibility, privacy, and so on into every product. But the other part of accessibility is, of course, the inclusivity element and making sure that people are able to use the tools. And there we can help with training and readiness.
And could I ask you, I'm a farmer's daughter, Stephen's a farmer's son, but from my experience, from a small farm on the southwest coast of Ireland, artificial intelligence is sort of like a foreign language to many of my neighbours who are farming. Remind us, Nana Louise, to what extent is artificial intelligence actually implemented on the ground? To what extent is that trajectory developing? And are there certain pockets around Europe where that's more prevalent? Surely it's a case that this isn't prevalent across the European Union, that there are certain pockets and certain member states that are perhaps leading the way here.
Actually, where we see the most uptake of these AI tools is in the US. Even for small farmers like that have maybe 3 or 4 people, 7,500 acres, that they are using sensors in the soil.
You call that small, do you? Yeah, you call that small, okay. We're on different levels here.
I have a solution for the even smaller ones as well. No, but they have sensors in the soil that shows, you know, when to water, when to fertilize. They have drones overseeing satellites, and so different tools to give information on their business, and then a tool. We have. Okay, I can go into more detail. Now I see my time,
Your time is just up,
but I can give you some details of what we can do. I think, you know, there is also very simple tools being developed. For example, an app. It's being used in the US at the moment, which is simply access to experts. So that can be used in a normal language from, you know, you don't need to be able to read or write, or you can just talk to the tool and get expert advice. So that is something very simple for...
Sure, for beginners, let's say. And as you say, there's a role there for industry, I suppose, in training and accessibility and that transfer of knowledge as well and transfer of technology know-how. Thank you for that, Nana Louisa. Next up, Sébastien from the Club de Meter. You might make your introductory comments and then we'll come back to you with some questions, Sébastien. Please, go right ahead.
Thank you. For me, we have to consider the big picture and maybe to try to maintain a long-term vision if we want to move forward. In this century, considering both demographic growth and ecological challenges, we are facing an unprecedented scenario. We need to increase human security and human development, which means increase food security, and for everyone. Food is crucial for life and well-being. We know this, but we don't have to forget this. But we need to decrease carbon emission. This is the difference. We need to decrease carbon emission and human footprints in nature. For the first issue related to security, let me remind you that we will reach a demographic peak between 2040 and 2070, around 10 billion people. And despite the collapse of birth and fertility in many regions of the world, having 10 billion people on this planet has never happened in history. Never. And today, among the 8 billion people on Earth, that's 2 billion more than 25 years ago. We still have 1 billion hungry people and 2 additional billion in moderate food insecurity. So we have to consider that many people in this world are trying to live this poor trap and this food sobriety. We have to consider that many people in this world are trying to live this food sobriety. For the second issue related to sustainability, we are also in an unprecedented scenario. We have to decarbonize our lifestyle, our economies, our consumption, so living without destroying, eating but preserving the planet. In this context, maybe we have to introduce a debate here in Brussels that food carbon emission is maybe a different topic that entertainment carbon emission. Is it a good thing to compare all the carbon emission? Do we have to consider the food one as specific because food is also life and human development? I don't know. But I'm asking the food carbon emission as specific. So for 20 years, I've been trying to understand and analyze the links between geopolitics, agriculture, and food. It's not a new topic, and maybe in Europe we are rediscovering the topic, but remaining in the Titanic dining saloon. Food and drinks are available, music is cozy, and we are not all aware of the geopolitical and ecological upcoming disruption. These are the systemic changes, ecology, but also geopolitics. And what we have to consider is the difference between today and 15 years ago at global level. Cooperation to reduce the risk are not the key words as they were 50 years ago during the world food crisis. Since the COVID, maybe since Trump, since a couple of years, we are talking about sovereignty. We are talking about national interest. This is another path to climb the food Everest, as I mentioned, because that means you are not thinking of a collective adventure. The agricultural rearmament is made by many powers, many countries, in order to protect themselves. So we have this predominant vision, not comfortable vision. National food security first. Food for each, not food for all. And maybe we have to consider this big picture if we want to move forward correctly, both for the transition we have to do for ecological reasons, but if we lose the human security battle, we will lose everything.
Mm-hmm. I understand that you're an expert in this broader geopolitical context, and I've read some of your articles where you say that the EU needs less politics and more strategy for agriculture. So looking ahead to the next administration, Sebastian, what do you mean by that, and what's your advice then to perhaps even Ursula von der Leyen in her second mandate? That's a controversial topic. That's another topic for another day, I suppose. But let's just say, what would be your main message to her when you say less politics, more strategy when it comes to farming?
Maybe that we don't have a planet B for climate, but we don't have planet B for geopolitics and for human security. So we have to consider the both issue. And we must climb to the top of global food security between, as mentioned, 2040 and 2070. And we have to help people getting to the top and bring down as many people as possible with as much oxygen as possible. We cannot increase food security in this century without protecting ecosystem and natural resources. But we cannot have a long-term planetary viability without safety and development for our lives. So for sure, agriculture, livestock, fisheries, aquaculture, farmers are at the core of sustainable development. They are part of solution, not against the society, not against the future, not against transition. So the debate for me is not between ecology or geopolitics. The debate is about the means and the spirits. Here you have again the Everest metaphor. You must prepare to climb the Everest. You cannot improvise to climb or attempt to climb to the roof of the world without preparation, training, and resilience during the performance. Let me remind that when you are on the roof of the Everest, you can only stay for 5 to 15 minutes at max, because there is a third of the oxygen level from the sea level. So you are exhausted, you are euphoric maybe, and the descent is perilous because of physical fatigue and a lack of oxygen. So the risk of an accident or physical harm is huge in comparison to the ascent. So the Everest of food security is the image that allowed me to explain that we have this unprecedented scenario in this century, And we have to cultivate cooperation and multilateralism in the world. But if I can...
Sorry, Sebastian, I'm actually just going to cut across you, if I may, because we do have to get to Vanessa, and I'll get back to you on the Mount Everest analogy, because it is quite timely, and I think you capture it well. But if I may, I might cut across you and go straight to Vanessa Stifler-Klaus, who is joining us online. Vanessa, can you hear us?
Okay. I can, thank you.
Great. Vanessa, I give you the floor now for your 5 minutes to give the John Deere perspective, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, very much. Thanks, Rose, and thanks to the panelists. There are things mentioned that coming to you right now from Washington, D.C. in the United States from John Deere, but I think that as we're talking about food systems and agriculture and climate change, this debate, this nexus of sustainability for agriculture is really nothing new. Farmers have been stewarding their environment. No farmer wants to deplete their valuable assets of soil and biodiversity. And so we're really talking about an extension of our vocabulary of how important this is for citizens of the world and for the agriculture sector. And so I really appreciate, Jörg Andreas, your comments about it being a very complex system and that farmers being managers of landscapes. And then, of course, that is something that we at Deere have been thinking about for almost 200 years, manage their landscape. And so I'm very excited. We are very excited at Deere. It is a big challenge facing us to talk about sustainability, agriculture, digitalization, AI, to pick up on Nana Luisa's comments. So there are a lot of great opportunities, and change can be scary, but there are really, really great examples of how farmers are at the forefront of bringing better production systems to producing food and agriculture products. I'm going to give a couple examples of some of the things we're looking forward to in the next couple that will really help make that change. There is a huge...
Vanessa, you seem to be cutting out on us. You seem to be sort of breaking up, so maybe there's a problem with your microphone. We'll stick with it. We'll keep you on the line, Vanessa, but there may be a connection problem. But we can hear you, but you seem to be breaking up on us, okay? I'm not sure if it's something to do with your microphone or maybe your connection. Let's try it again. Let's try it again, Vanessa. We can hear you perfectly well. It's just that there's cuttings.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just going to say that I think there are some great opportunities for the private sector and private innovation to help maybe smooth some of the challenges with changing regulations that Jörg Andreas noted. Politics shifts and change, but farmers need consistency so that they can invest in new technology and new products and practices. And so we've seen this great trend towards digitalization of machines, using precision agriculture to validate what farmers are doing to protect soil, protect biodiversity, using operations information and intelligence to understand the sustainability of livestock, of various production systems, using technology to reduce the use of pesticides and herbicides. We have many, many products in our portfolio and, of course, among our industry that enable farmers to really see dramatic reductions in use of pesticides and fertilizer inputs, which is very good for their bottom line, very good for the environment, and very good for soil health, of course. Some other things in the livestock sector. I know you, Rose, you asked some of these products for European farmers or for smaller farmers. This is not just for the United States and large-scale agriculture, but the insights we can gain from understanding herd health, for example, in the dairy sector, with opportunities in the livestock milk sustainability center we're working on, will help farmers of all sizes understand best practices, how to apply the herd health and forage health to deliver higher quality and higher output of dairy products. We also see opportunities for smallholders, even in very small holding farmers, to use technology to procure services. We're working very closely with companies in Africa to help deliver mechanization, smallest of smallholder farmers, by using apps that enable on-demand requests for contracting services. And that, I think, is a really brave new world, if you will, if you'll excuse the analogy, of of bringing in technology and products for farmers of all sizes that will really help us deliver the ecosystem services that society wants while delivering value to agriculture.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much for that. Can I just follow up? You speak a lot there about, I suppose, the idea of precision farming, solutions, digital innovations. Can I ask you about how the likes of John Deere manages what we would refer to as big data? And what are the sort of the ethical concerns and the ethical considerations that the likes of John Deere takes on board?
Well, you've asked a very big question, Rose, of course, and I know you know.
Go on, I'll give you about 30 seconds to answer as well, Vanessa, so go right ahead. Huh?
Yes, certainly. So, I mean, generate data, and that is something that we know it needs to be held sacred, right? The generator of that information and the person who needs to benefit most directly from it is the farmer who owns that information and data. And so, but that is very important and a core tenet. In aggregate, though, we can look at agriculture practices across ecosystems and extract insights and knowledge from that will be able to be used across landscapes. So we can know then in aggregate as policymakers or as implementers of those programs what the benefits of certain practices are. And so I think there's a way to absolute data that the farmer creates and to that come from that across countries, states, counties, etc.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that, Vanessa. Just leave that there for a moment. I might just go back to you, Patrick. We're obviously discussing the need for systemic change, and I think we all agree that this is what we are looking for. It's not like we're not singing off the same hymn sheet here. But surely, Patrick, this was the chatter already 5 years ago. I feel as if, I mean, I've only been moderating this event for 3 years, but I feel as if we're kind of stuck in Groundhog Day here, that we seem to be taking 1 step forward, 2 steps back. The European Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy, there was a lot of fanfare when this was launched at the end of 2019, in the first 100 days of Ursula von der Leyen's mandate. Are we taking a step back there, Patrick? And I just feel as if the progress in terms of what we've achieved over the last 5 years, a lot of things seem to be kind of taken off the table, shelved, and you're going to say that there are probably other initiatives that are coming on board. You mentioned water resilience even. Wasn't that due in January of this year? That paper, if I recall correctly.
Well, look, I mean, thanks for the question. And I think that this is a topic which is with us for the long term. I mean, I think that the Farm to Fork and the national strategic plans of member states, to some extent, there was potential to do more in advancing the green agenda in those initiatives. And we see that the very difficult political context at the moment is making it perhaps more difficult here and there to get agreement on key texts like the nature restoration law, and I've spoken on that. But as you will, I guess, have heard from the President this morning, I mean, the direction of travel remains very, very clear. And it's not just the direction of travel which is being promoted by the European Commission. As you say, I think there's a collective recognition that we, and starting with the farming community, have a collective interest in preserving the sustainability of our agricultural model for the future, because it is the guarantee of future production and the future livelihood of our farming communities. And so, while I'm part of the conversation and on the water resilience, I think we do see that the effects of climate change are now starting to impact very directly on the capacity of farming communities to work in the way that they traditionally have. Whether that's sort of communities in southern member states where it is no longer possible because of the shortage of water or because of the temperature rises to produce some of the crops that they were previously producing, or the very, very distressing and worrying impacts of things like the growing number of floods or wildfires. So, the farming community, the rural communities are as directly exposed as the rest of society in all of this. And I think that it is very encouraging that on events like this, we have this opportunity, and also the forum that the President has set up to address these issues together. On the water resilience initiative that the President announced in the State of the Union speech last September, I mean, it's true that we were planning maybe to put something out in March. and but then actually two things. I mean, firstly, it fits very nicely with the proposals that the Commission adopted just a few days ago, or the analysis on climate risk, and the sort of growing focus on climate adaptation, where I think that the water resilience is going to be a sort of part of that. The other thing is that we need more data and analysis. We are in DG Environment now looking at the river basin management and flood management plans that member states have submitted to us. Those haven't all come to us in the time that we'd hoped, but it is on the basis of that sort of analytical, scientific sort of inputs that we want to move forward. And I'm very confident that the whole question of whereas today we look a lot at the sort of quality of water, so are our rivers and lakes, marine environments in good quality, we also need increasing to look at water supply and whether we are collectively able to manage water where we need it and not too much water where we don't need it. Okay. And I think this will be the discussion for the future.
Thank you for that, Patrick. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to open up the floor now to questions. And I have a gentleman right over here. Can I get a microphone over here, please? Raise your hand. Introduce yourself and say to whom the question is addressed, and maybe keep it concise if you don't mind. Thank you.
Today I'm optimistic. I'm Philippe Weiler, CEO of Fairtrade Belgium. Welcome. I see 20% of the bananas being bought here in Belgium are Fairtrade certified. Fairtrade means that the farmer got a right price, an ethical price. 20% of the chocolate that is being bought here in Belgium is Fairtrade. But it's all based on voluntary initiatives from companies, from retailers and A-brands. But that's not enough. I mean, if we just rely on voluntary mechanism, it's not going to happen. So my question is, what is needed, or how can we force that internalization of those external costs? Because that's what Fairtrade is doing. Paying the right price means that the external cost of child labor, deforestation are being included in the price of the banana, the chocolate bar, and whatever. How can we force that internalization into the right price? Because legislation, I mean, that's difficult to have a very strong due diligence legislation. It's not going to happen in overnight. So how can we force that?
Okay, Jörg Andreas and maybe Sebastian briefly. Go ahead.
I think the most appropriate way is to raise step by step the quality standards. And I mean, that's what was the original idea of all these certification systems, that you start with a system and then you start with the early movers, you grow then as a system, and then you raise the bottom for the rest of the whole market. That has to be done very often by market initiatives or by legislation. And as far as I understand, is that something what the European Commission and the EU is doing with the first regulations now along supply chains and the responsibilities of companies. So, but I agree, it's not fast enough. And I mean, fair trade is a quite good working example for some progress. We have other certification systems like RSPO for the palm oil or the one for the soy, which are not at that status at the moment.
Okay, Sebastian, would you like to jump in there in terms of externalities being incorporated into the true price of food products?
Yes, maybe quickly mention that as consumers we have to pay the real cost of food production. And for me, the good price of food production is the one that is good for health, good for the planet, good for the landscape, as mentioned, but also good for the producer and the farmer. And maybe we have to consider in Europe that forever low price for food is over. And maybe we have to mention that food inflation is a good notice, because food inflation is a greenflation, is a social inflation with the fair trade practices, for example, as you mentioned. So maybe we have to put our values in the same manner and with the same energy when we put money on the table for food security.
Thank you for that, Sebastian. I think certainly when we emerged from COVID-19, food inflation then, there was a whole question that food inflation peaked right in March of last year. I think that was the first time consumers were sort of attacked by that sense that, you know, food prices had increased, and that was really, you know, a bit of a shock to the system, that all along food had been sort of undervalued, let's say. I see a question right up here, Mr. Corrado, right? I mean, it's been a number of years since I've seen you. Please, did you raise your hand? Yes, please, get a microphone over here if you don't mind.
Thank you for recognizing me.
Yes, okay, it's been a while, but it's been a while.
My question is directed to Patrick Child. When one wants to do action on something, one needs money, generally. So if you want to liberalize trade, you need adjustment assistance for those who are negatively impacted by it. The US are doing better than Europe on that, but anyway. So if you take environment and agriculture, you want farmers to adapt, you need money. Now you say they're being paid a lot. Some people say that a lot of money is going to agriculture. The question is, there is a change of system, a transfer of situation, in environment, in agriculture, in other ways. In each case, you need money. The question is, with 1% of GDP in Commission or European Union money, you cannot do what you want to do, unless a lot of money comes from the private sector, which doesn't seem to be sufficiently the case. So either one finds a way to increase substantially the budget in order to have this environment transfer of agriculture and so on, and therefore one finds a way to get the resources for it, which would be very easy politically. With the financial transaction tax, for instance, you can get a lot of money with a very low tax, or with a carbon tax, or there are other ways, or tax on multinationals, etc. And if the politicians of the European Union cannot decide to do that, I'm extremely pessimistic that what the good ideas which have been on the table could be implemented. Thank you.
Okay. Patrick, do you want to respond to that?
Well, it's great to see you again. Huh? And of course, more comfortable sitting on this side of the table than on your side. No, look, I mean, I think, you know, firstly, I agree with you that we probably need to do better in making sure that our policy objective, our policy agenda is well connected with the way we spend our money. And that, you know, probably we haven't yet gone far enough in that direction. And we will have the opportunity with the proposals for the next MFF. And I feel it particularly strongly in working now in DG Environment, where we only have a very small budget in the LIFE program, and where implementing some of our legislation requires very, very substantial investment. I, for example, have been working on the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which requires huge investment in all of our cities around Europe, and a huge amount of the structural funds has actually been used to do that, but without the sort of natural expectation and guarantee. And I think the same is true in certain areas of agricultural spending. I mean, the second thing I would say is that I think we are making progress with mainstreaming and earmarking, say that, you know, a certain percentage of the budget has to be devoted to the European Green Deal objectives or climate, including in the big spending programs like the Common Agricultural Policy, the structural funds. I think the development of the principle around the do no significant harm, where we now are looking very carefully at, you know, proposed investments to check that they are consistent with our environmental policy, are encouraging. But I mean, the one thing that you know, although it would be great to be in this utopian world where the European budget were significantly larger than it is, I think we all know that even if we are very creative and imaginative in thinking up new own resources, and many of the ideas that you mentioned are in discussion, Own resources, as we know, are subject to unanimity decision-making, as in the end is the budget itself. And that if you also take account of the looming need to repay the very significant amounts of money which have been sort of mobilized through the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the next financial perspectives are going to be very challenging. And so, I think we do have to face that reality head on, and therefore do more of what I said at the beginning, that is, make sure that we are spending our money with the most possible sort of impact in terms of supporting the implementation of our the policies that we have in our legislation.
Okay, thank you for that, Patrick. Ladies and gentlemen, we're very tight on time, and Mr. Strohschneider is in the audience. So it now gives me great pleasure to invite Professor Peter Strohschneider to take to the podium. The perfect segue, perhaps, after Patrick Child's intervention there, in terms of the budget direction. The MFF, as Patrick says, will be very challenging, but this man right over here, the chairman of the Strategic Dialogue on the Future of European Agriculture, is hearing from stakeholders and to inform, let's say, the European Commission in the direction of travel for the next policy. Just by way of introduction, Professor Strohschneider is a German academic and an expert in medieval and pre-modern culture and literature. So I hope that brings a lot to the table during your discussions with stakeholders. So Professor Strohschneider, you've heard the panel discussion on systemic change. I'd like to hear your reaction, and also perhaps to give us a sort of, let's say, a bird's eye view of what's happening at this strategic dialogue and how you're addressing the whole issue of polarization in this debate. And there's 8 minutes or 7 minutes, 49 seconds on the clock, Professor, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The first time in my life that someone supposes that medievalism could contribute to budget developments. Anyhow, thank you for having me here, and thank you very much for the opportunity to sketch out the adventurous journey that the Strategic Dialogue on the Future of Agriculture has already started. It is a sort of response to the session 1, and in a sort of response to that, I would like to line out how this SD can be sorted in this way of approaching the future. I would like to draw this sketch in such a way that I distinguish between the 2 dimensions of the strategic dialogue, namely a procedural, or if you like, methodological dimension, and a second one, the factual issues that we are concerned with. Point 1. The strategic dialogue has the task, as the President of the Commission put it, has the task to reconcile agriculture and the preservation of nature. And this, in my eyes, means or implies to bring the respective stakeholders together. To bring them together to jointly, with all of them, make the attempt to build a conceptual consensus what agriculture, food and feed trade, food environments, rural areas, and so forth could and should look like in the future. So the strategic dialogue, therefore, is not just another participation exercise here in Brussels. An exercise where politics is listening to citizens and organizations and their multiple concerns and interests in order to better inform its policies and to legitimate its decisions. Of course, there is a comparable mechanism within the framework of the strategic dialogue in the format of a targeted consultation. I requested input from more than 170 EU-wide organizations currently present in the Commission's consultative bodies with an interest in the future of agriculture. And of course, this input will feed into the ongoing work of the dialogue. But at the core of the strategic dialogue is not a group of citizens addressing politics with their opinions and concerns. The principal logic of our exercise is rather that stakeholders are talking to stakeholders, seeking and developing a common pathway towards the future of European agriculture, seeking and developing a set of coherent recommendations to be reported to the President von der Leyen and feeding into the work of the next Commission and, quotation, shaping it. Groups of stakeholders talking to stakeholders, seeking and developing a consented concept that is unanimously supported by these broad range of stakeholders from across the whole agri-food system, and that, as mentioned by the President in her video message this morning, and that is replacing current polarization. And this opens up a range of opportunities. There's a tremendous, in my perspective, a tremendous political opportunity for European farmers, not only having to put forward their interests as special interests, but to find new partners, from environmentalists and consumers protection, from financing to trade, new partners that are convinced by the importance of agriculture and committed to it. To have a common agenda of transforming pathways which give pressure to the political system in implementing them, being able to represent their interests, the farmers' interests, to a certain extent within the framework of a social consensus, going far beyond farming alone, but integrating its entire societal and economical context. So far for the procedural aspects of the strategic dialogue. As for the factual issues we are dealing with, I can refer to the mandate that the President has set up for the dialogue. It describes, but it is not restricted to, 4 guiding questions, namely how farmers and rural communities they live in can have better perspective, including a fair standard of living. Secondly, how this can happen within the boundaries of the planet and its ecosystems. Third, how innovations can contribute to them. And innovation means technical, digital, biochemical, genetical, social innovations likewise. And fourth, how a bright future for Europe's food system can be promoted in a competitive world. This outlines show a systemic approach, thus covering the entanglements of economy, ecosystems and climate, knowledge and nutrition. To put it in a more sophisticated way, one can say the strategic dialogue addresses the agri-food system as part of an urgent transformation of almost all patterns of production, distribution and consumption of goods and services that will affect our entire civilization. But to be clear, this societal approach not only makes things even more complex, it shows at the same time that the solution does not lie solely with the farmers and their subsidies, but that it is a task for society as a whole, of producers and industry and trade and consumers and politics, of using and protecting our natural resources and common goods, of old and young, of urban and rural societies likewise, etc., pp. The societal approach of this strategic dialogue offers new opportunities for newly balancing, competing, even conflicting interests of farmers and environmentalists, of the actors in the entire value network. It offers new opportunities, I think, for overcoming the political status quo of agri-environmental politics, a status quo in which every environmental achievement seems to be an agri-political disadvantage and vice versa. There's an opportunity for a societal subsystem at all to surprise by a new method of doing policies, I would say. Could you dare how disturbing and fascinating it would be if farmers and environmentalists, together with the traders' organizations, would protest in front of the Parlement for a fast implementation of their recommendations? I'm actually looking forward to it. It is much too early to go into more detail, ladies and gentlemen, but what can be said is the following. Launched only by the end of January this year, the strategic dialogue is already on track. Its core members are heavily engaged and committed in a surprisingly constructive and positive attitude. Of course, there may be a risk of failure, e.g., a vague final report with little content. However, there is much more reason to be optimistic. It is indeed possible, ask Jörg Andreas for his testimony, it is indeed possible to jointly develop a final report that describes convincingly and in a politically impactful manner, that describes how farming can be profitable and at the same time ecologically sustainable and responsible, while producing good and healthy food, while contributing to the preservation and restoration of vivid rural areas, and while decisively contributing to coping with climate change and species extinction. Thanks very much for your attention.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Before I let you go, Professor Strohschneider, when can we expect that final report? When is your deadline?
Harvest time this year.
Harvest time this year. Well, we look forward to reading the recommendations. Professor Strohschneider, ladies and gentlemen, Chairman of the Strategic Dialogue on the Future of EU Agriculture. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to cut it off here. I'm conscious of time. We're going to have to wrap it up. Just my thanks indeed to my panellists for this interesting debate. Apologies I didn't get to all of the room for the questions and answers, but we are stuck for time. Mr. Patrick Child, Jörg Andreas Küger, Nana Louise Linda, Sebastian Abis, and Vanessa Stifler-Klaus. Good morning to you in Washington, and thank you very much indeed, Professor Peter Strohschneider. I am going to get used to saying that name, Professor. So thank you very much indeed. I would now invite you all to return to the auditorium. Thank you.